This is The Change Underground. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. This week is part 2 of our summer series. It's a longish episode, one where I interviewed Mark Rathbone, a well-known and successful biodynamic farmer from northern Victoria. Well worth a listen, and has been a very popular download episode ever since it was first uploaded. So, see you next week. This week we do something a little bit different. We have an interview with a biodynamic farmer, Mark Rathbone. Mark grows vegetables for weekly markets on a seasonal basis. He's bringing soil to life and putting carbon back in it. So enjoy the interview and I'll be back at the end. I will point out though that the track is a little bit noisy in places, so if you concentrate on the voice, you'll hear everything Mark has to say. Here we go. Well, hello everyone. Today we're interviewing Mark Rathbone from Save Our Soil. He's located in Victoria, Australia, I believe. Are you there, Mark?
Yes. Hi, John. How are you going?
Not too bad. If you could tell us where you are and what it is you're up to and how you got there would be good.
Okay. I have a business called Save Our Soil. We're in northern Victoria, about 3 hours north of Melbourne, due north near Echuca on the border almost, at a place called Kyabram. And I have a 50-acre seasonal vegetable farm there where I supply vegetables to the Melbourne population on a farmers market level. And we've been doing that for about 7 years now. But prior to that, my father had a dairy farm and he started Biodynamics in 1965 when I was about 3 years old. So I'm one of the few second-generation biodynamic farmers, and I don't really know how to farm any other way, to be honest. So what we do is we basically grow vegetables from Monday to Wednesday, weeding, planting, those sort of things, and then we harvest on Thursday and Friday, and on Saturday is market day, and we drive 3 hours south to Melbourne, and we have about 200 or 300 clients there who come every Saturday, and we have a Sunday market as well, and we supply them with seasonal biodynamic vegetables. So that's been my gig now for the past 6 or 7 years.
1965 is impressive.
Yes. Alex Podolinsky, who was one of the main players in biodynamics in Australia, came up our way and was doing a series of lectures, and my father went to those lectures and learnt biodynamics from him. Mm-hmm. So I don't know any other way of farming, and when I was a kid, Dad used to drag me around to all the lectures, and I actually thought a lecture was people leaning on a shovel talking about soil, because I was too young to understand any different. So I helped Dad out in the farm on and off over the years, and with the dairy farming. Then we were the victims of climate change. I guess you might remember the 2000 drought went for 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody does who was in the farming sector.
Yep.
And we were bringing in biodynamic feed from Western Australia to try and keep the cows alive. Yet the supermarkets were still keeping dollar milk on the shelf, which was a bit disappointing. Mm. So Dad decided he wanted to retire in 2010, and in the middle of the drought I thought it wasn't a great business move to go into dairy farming. Plus, being brought up on a dairy farm, you tend to dislike it after a while.
Those 4 o'clock starts.
Yeah, that's right, and that frosty motorbike. Yeah. So at 48 years old, I decided that I wanted to try something else, and I wanted to be able to take my produce direct to the customers and charge what I felt was a fair thing and not be a price taker, which the supermarkets have sort of muscled us into over the years. So I've been doing that for 7 years now, and it's going really quite well. The first 2 years was a bit of a struggle learning all the new products that I had to grow. I knew melons. We started off with melons and tomatoes, and then the winter stuff I didn't really know how to do very well, and it took me a couple of years to get that down pat, and trying to get that regular supply too was a difficult challenge. But we've got that down now, and we're doing quite well with it.
Yeah, it's a skill, isn't it? You've actually got to do it to learn it.
Yes, I think that's pretty much anything, John.
Well, yeah. Yeah, but particularly when it comes to growing food, you can read all the books you like, but until you got your hands in the dirt, the reality of it never really hits home.
I agree, and I thought I knew a fair bit about veggie farming. I was doing it about 10 years prior to going full-time, but when your income relies wholly and solely on that genre of farming, then you are quickly to learn a few more things. And getting that constant supply every week to the farmers market was, probably the biggest challenge.
And so it's a seasonal thing then? You take different things every week?
That's right. Yeah. Our summer crops are mainly, with Biodynamics, we don't use any fertiliser. It's a closed farming system. We try and create all our fertility on the farm, whether that be through compost or whether we use the biodynamic preparations. So by not fertilising, our flavour comes from the humus of the soil, and it's quite intense, especially with the sweet things like melons, strawberries, tomatoes. And I have very few competitors in that realm because I'm the only biodynamic vegetable guy there.
Yep.
So I have big sales on melons especially, and I can almost take a whole van load. I've got like a 5-metre VW van, and I can pretty much put a tonne and a half of melons in there and, almost sell them all in the 2-day period. So with the BD, it's really good to have that up your sleeve, that extra flavour. And so we do melons, tomatoes, strawberries, cucumbers, zucchinis, all the summer things. And then we grow our pumpkins, and we actually do sweet potatoes in Victoria, which is I'm one of the first to do that, I believe.
Yeah.
And that was a bit of a skill in itself, but I've mastered that over the last 4 years, and I'm actually going to Melbourne Uni to talk on Friday about that exercise, so that's an interesting thing. So then in the winter time we do cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, all those kind of things, and try and do it on a weekly basis, basically.
Chinese vegetables?
I did start off with bok choy and a few things like that. It seems at the farmers market you can't go too far out of the box to get the most sales, if you know what I mean. You've got to please pretty much everybody.
Yep.
And there are sort of some stands that sort of specialise in the different types of veggies. So if there's one there that's doing bok choy, you may as well just let them do it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it was just a thought.
Just to specialise in that. But I do have requests to doing that, but then sometimes you follow the people's requests and they don't sell very well, and you sort of go back to your basic veggies.
Know what works. Yeah. Do you do potatoes as well?
Yeah. Again, I'm in the northern part of Victoria, which is great for hot things, like hot climate things.
Yep.
We're in the temperate zone. And the guys down south in the more colder zones are good with potatoes, so I don't try and compete with them. I specialise in what my climate will do.
Yeah. So you say you're growing sweet potatoes. Do you think that's a climate change thing in that it's moved further south? Or could you always grow them around there?
I don't really know, John. A person grew them in town, and I thought, well, if he can do them, I can do them. So I did my degree on Google, and
as we do,
had a bit of a crack at it, you know. So I don't really know.
Okay. No. Just curious, because there was a Four Corners program a couple of months back where the grape growers who have had Brown Brothers have had records for the last 130 years. And they've had to move their cool climate grapes to Tasmania because in the last 30 years the temperatures are just too high. So
yeah, I did see that.
Yeah, it's sort of physical evidence on the ground.
Yet I find that I'm having to move my summer planting season back. It used to be like mid-October. But now we get occasional frost, like late October. And so it's colder for longer in the winter, but it seems to be hotter for longer in the summer, or more intense or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, the extremes seem to be getting bigger.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it seems to be polar opposites.
Yeah. I was in the Blue Mountains up until April, and we really hadn't had autumn by the time I left. We're still getting 30, 35 degrees. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So do you think the biodynamics offers a buffer against the climate change, makes things more resilient, or...?
Yeah, I think so. When we first started Biodynamics in 1965, Dad had a sheep farm, and the sheep were grazed openly wherever they wanted to run, So they kept the grass short on the top, and obviously the root systems below that were short too. We overgrazed it. We put too much fertilizer on and incorrectly tilled it, and the soil got hard, and the irrigation water wouldn't go in.
Yeah.
So, to make a long story short, after 20 years of biodynamic development and methodology, our soil went from 4 inches to 4 feet. We had a test done in the late 90s. A young university student came down here and started digging our soil to see how far the root systems were going down, and he went down to about 5 feet and found root systems down that far. So we noticed the change in colour quite dramatic, and our irrigation times went from once every 7 days to once every 30. So our infiltration rate of the water and the root system was much greater, and that was able to access water for longer. So, yes, I do believe it is a buffer. If we were having to water every 7 days, a lot of it would evaporate off, and we would use more water, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that far down the system, there's not as much water as there could be, I guess. They're still working at the Murray-Darling thing. But,
yes.
Yeah, that's just ridiculous. But you've got too many players involved, I guess.
Yeah, we went through the whole unbundling of water from where it was attached to the land to then attached to whoever owns it, which was quite the process. And yes, I'm not sure about whether that's beneficial or not, really.
Yeah. Okay, so basically you just grew a bigger sponge over those 25 years.
Yeah, that's right. And the basics, for those who don't know what biodynamics is, it's a range of techniques. We have a set of preparations. One is called 500. A lot of people think 500 is the only thing, but it's not. 500 is basically cow manure in a cow horn, which is, we have our organisation make it, because in Europe they made it themselves, and there was a lot of mistakes made, I guess, and there was inconsistencies there.
Yep.
So we have our organisation make our own 500.
That's the Demeter organisation?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
So that makes sure that it's made correctly. Basically, the idea of the cow horn is it's like a little house for the microbes to go into. We put cow manure in there, and cows, as you know, are a great incubator for soil development microorganisms. So by putting the cow manure in the cow horn and burying it in the soil over the winter period, what we're trying to do there is really capture some microbes that have got really good soil development qualities. And even in the horn, I think there's some fungi in there which I think would develop over the winter period as well. So when that comes out in the spring, it's lovely, sweet-smelling product, similar to humus or a well-digested compost heap. And what we do with that is we put it into tubs and store it. It's got to be kept moist, or otherwise the bugs die. And then we put it into a spray tank at 37 degrees C, which is a great temperature to distribute those microbes throughout the moisture. So we end up with a big tub of microbes, and then we spray it on the soil in large droplets. So if you can imagine, 500 is an indication of 500 million microbes per gram. Okay. We didn't sit there and count them, but
close
I
enough.
guess Yeah, that's right. So it's a figure of abundance, we'll say.
Yeah.
And so when we mix it into our stirring machine, we spread out in large droplets so that those droplets hit the soil.
Yep.
So if you imagine thousands of microbes in each droplet hitting every inch or so, then you're spreading that out onto your nice moist soil, and it's warm in spring and autumn, and the microbes spread throughout the soil structure, opening up holes, making holes, and it's like a starter culture, John, for soil. I mean, we all know about what rennet will do for cheese, and yeast will do for bread. Well, it's a bit like that. So that's an oversimplified version, but I think the average listener would understand that type of culture.
That makes a lot of sense. So your earthworm numbers are fairly high then?
Yes, the earthworms are the elephant of the whole system. They come and go as they're needed. And the small microbes that we're putting on obviously set up a whole network of other microbes coming into that spot, and then they pretty much feed off each other in a predatory type system. And the worm comes along probably last and eats everything, and all the stuff coming out the back of it, as well as other microbes, is your water-soluble, plant-available nutrient. So that's pretty much how it works.
Yeah, no, I did an episode start of May on the earthworms as the canary in the mine.
Yeah, I did hear that.
Yeah, if your earthworms are dying, you're buggered.
Exactly.
But, So it's a whole. It's basically if I can sum up what I'm hearing, if you look after the soil, everything else gets looked after by the soil.
Correct. Yeah, we're just sort of. I guess we're putting more willing workers into the soil than that were already there. For example, when we first started on the dairy farm, we had little or no microbes in our soil. Yeah. And by adding, 500 million per gram, you're putting a lot of willing workers out there to do some extra work, you know what I mean? And the idea of biodynamics is to re-enliven dead soil. And once you seem to get the system going, as you said, John, once it seems to get to about 3% organic matter, it pretty much looks after itself, you know what I mean? And if you've got good root structure, you don't over-bash it around with tillage and heavy tractors and fertiliser and chemicals, it pretty much looks after itself and regenerates all the time. People say to me, is biodynamics difficult? And I say, well, no, not really. Once you've grown your soil, it pretty much does the work for you. You just really got to put your plants in and keep them watered and weeded. It's
the setup that takes the time.
That's right, yeah. It's just the initial first few years where you've got to have a bit of a think about. Now, initially when we went in the dairy farm, we deep ripped. And we have these rippers which don't actually turn the soil over. They basically, they're very fine, thin, but strong. And we go quite deep and we crack and fracture the soil, and then we spray our 500 on the top of that so the microbes jump in the cracks, if you know what I mean.
They've got somewhere to live.
Then, yeah, that's right, exactly. So they're not in the sun, they're out of the weather, and they can start to live in those cracks. So we don't do that every year, of course, because we don't want to upset them too much. But initially, to get the air in the soil, we had to lift them very gently and get the whole thing started.
So back, 65, that would have been during the superphosphate bounty where people were paid money to spray the stuff about, which would have killed off basically everything in the soil.
Yeah, that's right. In the 90s, we had some soil tests done on our place, or a comparative study done by some local scientists, and we got quite friendly with them, and they were talking about how just by us at the time putting on heaps of superphosphate, we were knocking out some of our fungi. And the fungi has the ability to drill into our sand, our silt, and draw out minerals for the plant in exchange for photosynthesis or sugars. And by putting on our super, we were diminishing our soil's ability. So it's almost, counterintuitive.
In some ways, yeah. But if I look at it as biodynamic, the preparations and whatnot are feeding the whole soil, whereas superphosphate was just allegedly filling in a hole that was missing.
Yeah, that's right.
And soil science is physics and chemistry, but rarely gets the biology, which is a shame.
It is, yeah. We had some soil tests done, and they usually, I think, dry out the soil when they test for minerals and things, but I often question or wonder, and you might be able to answer this, that even the microbes themselves would harbour some form of nutrition, and I don't know if there is a test for that, but it seems strange that they burn everything and then test it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's almost, yeah, they're missing the living part. So, yeah, and I'm not sure why they do that. That was just, I did a horticulture certificate, and they said that's what they do, and this is what you get back, and this is what you need. And I thought, it's not that simple. It's
no,
and yet it is incredibly simple if you leave it alone.
Exactly, and yeah, that's right. And you see nature working itself. Like I have 50 acres, but I only use 5 acres in any one time. So the rest is in pasture, basically. Mm-hmm. And you get your spring grasses, they fall over and create a mulch. You know, and then I spray my 500 on top of that just to maintain microbes more than anything. Mm-hmm. And they go in there under the mulch and they, you know, do their work, and then the summer comes about and then we leave it alone. And then by the time autumn comes around, the grasses grow up in between again and you spray them again. And the mulch is going on the top, the roots are going down the bottom, the microbes are eating both top and bottom, and the whole thing just works, you know, without too much thought.
Well, that's how it evolved to work. You know? Nature's been at it for a while.
That's right, and I think that's the difference between, you know, regenerative farmers or it's an attitude difference in regenerative farmers and non-regenerative farmers, in that we try and be stewards and work with nature, where the other guys try to beat it, I think.
Yeah, in some senses. But they're also trapped into debt.
Yes.
Which will force you to do all kinds of strange things. But what you're talking about with the grass shoots there, I came across in a book called The One Straw Revolution. I don't know if you've read that, by Masanobu Fukuoka. And that was what And that was what he noticed when he was out in the field. He was an agricultural scientist before he became basically a regenerative farmer. And he thought, if nature's doing it, why don't I just copy that? And so he stopped ploughing and tossed in seeds just before the previous crop was ready to be harvested. And then go in, harvest, toss the straw back on. When the next crop was nearly ready to go, he'd oversow with the next one, and so on. And he grew feet of soil in the 30 years he was doing it. But
sounds interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of Zen stuff in it as well, because he comes from the culture he came from. But it's a good read. It's the One Straw Revolution. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to have a look at that. I think that's the one thing I think too, is that there's a lot of different regenerative farming methods, and my hat goes off to all of them. At least they're all trying something, and we may have differences in methodologies and opinions, but I think we all should draw together more and talk about these things and understand each other's ideas and where we're trying to get with that. And as long as we're all producing an overall net positive soil carbon effect, I think they're all good.
Yeah. And I noticed the one thing they all have in common is that the founders of them actually just sat and watched nature. I thought, that's how you do it. Okay. Rather than, it sounds almost too easy, but yeah. And there's a fella from the Monero, which is just northeast of yourself, I guess. The high plains of the Snowies in New South Wales.
Yeah.
A fellow by the name of Charles Massey. He's
I've heard of him,
Yeah. Well, he was talking on Late Night Live about needing to get an extra 2% of carbon into 15% of the world's soils to reverse all the excess carbon since 1750.
Yeah.
And I thought, that sounds impressive. So I wrote to him and he said, well, provided we get good years, you could do it in 2 or 3.
I know. Well, that's one of my missions for coming on this podcast. And also I've developed a website called at biosoil.net.au, which is, I probably mentioned before. And what we're trying to do is just get more information out there to farmers and landholders so that they Biodynamics is a bit demystified. Unfortunately, when you go on Google and look up Biodynamics, we can't always, it's a free thing, everybody can do that. And Steiner had some things he used to do, like spiritual type things, and, you know, some people do both. And as Australian Demeter Biodynamic farmers, we don't. We just do farming, and we're practical farmers, and we only take on those methods. So I forgive those who see unusual things, but anyway, I just wanted to make that clarification that there are some really practical biodynamic farmers and really good ones, and there are some, you know, it's like going to a school ground. There's always the weird guy behind the shelter shed, you know what I mean?
I heard a similar, description of permaculture. And this fella said there's brown permaculture and there's purple. And the purple permaculture is the, you know, love, peace, mung beans. And he was a brown permaculturalist. He took the bit that worked so that he could make money and produce off his farm. And it's very similar to the difference you just described there.
Yeah.
Steiner was of his time. There was all kinds of strange and interesting things going on at the time. But the bits we need come through. You know, even Newton was into astrology and magic and all that sort of stuff, and yet all we remember him for is gravity.
That's right.
So the bits we need filter through.
So just to perhaps finish off with the description of biodynamics, apart from our 500 and our, we use other preparations, 502 to 507. I don't know why the numbers, but anyway, they're basically compost preparations which are made from herbs and other microbes from different sources, and we put them into the compost heaps. That's pretty much a starter culture for the compost heap to get the right microbes in there. The other one is 501, which is made from quartz crystal. The idea behind that is we mix that with water sprayed on the leaf, and it increases the light energy to the plant. So it's a physical thing, it's like zinc cream on your nose. It's sort of, except the opposite of that. The sunlight comes, hits the leaf, refracts through the crystals and increases the light energy. We don't use it much here in Australia, but in Europe, where they have cloudy conditions all the time, they do. We have really good light here, but we do use it in the wintertime when we've got those wintry conditions.
Okay.
So apart from...
So
it sounds weird, but it's when you think about it and know about how it's used...
No, I understand the physics you're talking about.
Yep.
It's just it sounded odd after saying we don't do the strange stuff, but we use quartz crystals.
Okay. But it's done in a physical sense, not in a...
I know why you do it. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. It's quite scientific. It's quite clever, really, and it works very well. I'm quite impressed by it. I haven't used it much, but a couple of times in the winter I have. It seems to be good for, as I said, providing a little bit more energy to the plant when photosynthesis-wise in the winter. So the other things we do are really just methodologies then. We use deep ripping in initial stages to get that air in and get the fungi and the microbes growing. We do strip grazing to make sure that it's called cell grazing now, I think is the modern term, but Alex brought that around in the 1950s and 60s. So you get that long grass at the top, get it off quickly so you've got good root growth down the bottom, and then move on to the next batch so you get it regrown. I think you talked about that in one of your podcasts. Yeah. So
it used to be called rotational grazing in the very old days.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. So we do that, and we also do harrowing, which we spread our cow manure very thinly to allow the microbes to digest that quickly in, and it also breaks up the trash on the top. So it's just like we make it out of car tyres or things like that, and we drag it across. So that's one of our actions as well. And then we make sure that we till correctly. We try not to till where possible. If we have to put a cover crop in, we'll use disc seeders and drill it in the top. But in a vegetable situation, sometimes we have to do that. But we do it very carefully. We use tines, thin tines, and we try and lift gently the soil and break it and not turn it over so much and expose all that beautiful biology to the sunlight. So we do it very carefully where we have to. I mean, it's a bit hard when you're growing sweet potatoes to get them out of the ground when without tilling. If we do till, it's only a very short period of time where we've got something growing and it's covered again with the leaves or the canopies, and we've got it watered, we've got the green happening, and the green plants are pumping carbohydrates back into the soil and back into the microbes as quickly as possible. So we are aware that we are disrupting through tillage, but we try and minimise it as much as possible and just do the bare essentials.
Yeah, it's not like you've used moldboard ploughs and turned the whole thing upside down.
No, that's right. It's sort of more lifting and cracking. So we don't like to break our fungi up too much. So we won't use a rotary tiller or those fine discs. I find a bit invasive in that they'll cut up all your fungi. Whereas if you nip the ends off and leave 3 feet between a few inches between each tine, he'll regrow and assert himself in the soil in a few days, pretty much, if you leave it be. Yeah. So
well, you've got the environment there for that to happen.
That's right, and also. When I dig my sweet potatoes up, I do some major disruption, I tell you. But the great thing about BD...
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah, that's right. And the great thing about BD is, look, within a year, I can put another cover crop in, spray my microbes on twice, and I can get it back to normal in about a year's time. So it's not like I can't repair it. I've got the technology. And I think it's more the understanding on how to do it too, John.
Yeah, knowing that that's what you're trying to save and repair rather than focusing on the crop itself.
Yep, that's right. And being aware that what you're doing at the time of doing it too, like, I'm going to disrupt here. How can I least do that, or with minimal damage?
It's almost thoughtful farming.
That's right.
Which isn't a bad thing.
No. So we do a lot.
Isn't a bad thing at all.
So for the start of my vegetable site, we put in a cover crop first with peas and all sorts of different things, species, everything bringing different things down into the soil from the air and from the sunlight. And then we dig that all in, and within a very short period of time, we've got our veggie crop growing again. So it is a bit disruptive when we do that, but as I said, the overall net effect with my veggies I find is a positive one. It's actually moving quicker in development-wise than the old dry pasture out the back, because the water's always there, the moisture's always there. We've got plants putting in carbohydrates all the time, and the microbes are turning that into biomass. So I actually find that it moves quicker with all the development, plus all the residues are going back in as well. So it is an overall positive effect. I'm actually moving the vegetables around the property to develop the soil, not to rest it.
to use them as the tool to build the soil.
That's right, because like you look at a zucchini plant, and, man, you take some zucchinis off it, geez, it's got a lot of foliage left over when you're finished,
There's a lot left.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when even broccoli, broccoli, you take this little tiny flower off and there's all the leaves that I have to dig back in, and we try and get them as quickly as possible, get our microbes 500 on it as quickly as possible, and then they start digesting. So we're sort of like builders of soil or growers of soil, and then we let the soil do the work.
Yeah, you set up the right conditions and then leave it alone.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what it's all about. We're almost like composting in the soil. So if you look at a compost heap, it has organic matter, it has airy conditions, it has the right microbes, it has moisture, and it has warmth. And if you can do all those things in the soil and then add your correct microbes to digest that all, you're pretty much composting in the soil. So you don't need your worm farm, you don't need all these things. It just happens in nature, funnily enough.
As it has been for some time.
That's correct, yes. And like we find that what we're doing is accelerating what nature can do. I don't know what the figures is. Some people say it's like an inch every 100 years, but I reckon nature's quicker than that in parts of the world. But
when it needs to be,
exactly. Like if depends where you are. If you're in the tropics, I'm sure it grows a metre in 100 years or more. Yeah, and gets washed away at about the same rate. That's right.
So I did read that there's a website called Journey to Forever, where these people drove from Beijing to Cape Town across Eurasia. And they have a whole section on composting and another thing on small farms and their benefits and whatnot. And they were saying, you know, the earth makes soil at such and such a rate, but compost will do it quicker. I forget the figures they gave. But basically, you're just adjusting the conditions that the soil's doing anyway, and just so that it can do it quicker.
That's right.
Yeah.
And once you understand how it all works, and that's the skill of the farmer, is that if conditions change, like if it rains heaps and heaps, you know, you're going to fill your soil with water, all the air holes are going to be taken up, the fungi is going to drop off, and you have to go out there and adjust and make some changes, drain off water, do whatever you have to do. So once you understand the conditions for microbes to grow and build, then you're much better situated to fix these things.
Do you have many pest problems?
No, I do have a few caterpillars in springtime, but only at certain times. I actually, if I do it, put them in early enough, I can miss the whole cycle, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But if I was just a wholesaler farmer, I'd probably know exactly when to do them. But because I'm a weekly farmer, I've got to have stuff coming in all the time. So we use a dipel. Do you know what dipel is?
No, I've no idea.
It's basically a fungus or a virus for moths only.
Okay.
So it's a biological control. Basically, they grow this fungus in the lab and make it into powder, and then you spray it onto your leaf, and the caterpillars eat it and they die. So it's not effective to humans or any other species apart from this individual caterpillar. So that's a thing that's allowed in the National Organic and Biodynamic Standards, and it's a thing that a lot of backyard gardeners use. So apart from that, I'm just trying to think of any others, but hares and cockatoos.
HARE?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
The cockatoos lately have been nipping off the broccoli seedlings, you know. And now they're having a crack at the pumpkins, trying to get at the seeds, I think. So.
No, they're horrible. We had a little garden in suburbia in the mountains, and half of it I put down to sweet corn. And that first spring, all these ladybirds just turned up out of nowhere and started eating whatever. But then the next year, the cockies had worked out what was going on, and just before they were ripe, they all swooped down while I was out one day and destroyed the whole lot to get at the corn. So they learn.
I think they know when you're not there.
Yeah, they're cunning. They're cunning.
Oh, dear. Because I go away on the weekends to market, and they seem to appear all of a sudden. You come back on Monday and you go, oh, my God, they've been. Yeah.
At first I thought it was possums, and I thought, no, it's just happening during the day. So, it was the cockies. But I don't know what you do. It's still, they're better than locusts, you know.
Yes, true.
You know, small mercies. So you're happy with what you're doing?
Yeah, very much so. One of the great things I feel or experience when I'm at the markets is we put out the melons as a tasting at the front of the stand. It's my salesperson, I call it. And the people come along and you'll see some cheapskates will come along and they'll grab a bit of melon and they'll head off pretty quickly so they don't have to buy any. Yeah. And they get about 30 metres down the track and they turn around and they say, well, you knew I'd come back, did you? Because they really have not tasted a melon like it before. And I was thinking about that, and I was brought up on a biodynamic farm, so I was used to good flavoured food. But then I thought about them, and I thought maybe they've just never, ever tasted good food before. Like they've always got it from the supermarket full of water-soluble fertiliser.
Yeah.
And
do
you find that? Yeah, bland, exactly. So when they taste something that's actually real, it's mind-blowing almost to them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that sweet corn we grew, it only moved 20 feet from the garden to the pot. And it was unlike anything you can buy anywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing is I see their families grow. They'll bring their kids, you know, and over 7 years I see them grow from 3 years old to 11, you know, and you feel a sense of fulfillment with that thinking, well, I've helped this young person grow into a healthy being, and even though it may be a small amount of produce, but I've certainly helped.
It's something. You'd be curious to know what effect of the organic, the biodynamic stuff has on gut health.
Yeah, it would be interesting to find it out. There's so much knowledge, and I mean, there seems to be more and more new science coming out about gut bacteria and soil bacteria, and there's Elaine Ingham and Dr. David C. Johnson seem to be doing a bit over in the States. We don't seem to be doing it a lot here, although I may not know about it. That's a possibility.
Well, that's the thing too,
but it's such a big thing. Like, I think people know more about the stars than they do about soil microbes.
Well, they're easier to work with. Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, where my other half is, she's doing a 12-week cookery course on an organic farm.
All right.
She's on medication, so she couldn't join the trial. But they're taking samples from some of the people that signed up to see if the 12 weeks straight eating organic food made any difference to the gut.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see the results of that.
Yeah, that'd be very interesting indeed. I often think that, even myself being out in the field all day and eating a carrot here, it's not really that clean.
Yeah.
or a tomato there. How much soil do I actually consume in a year,
Yeah. Well, you can tell that from tooth wear analysis. But,
right.
They tend to wait till people are dead before they do that. But,
oh, okay.
yeah. So basically everything's interconnected with everything else.
Yes.
And if you get the soil right, you get the health right, I reckon.
Yeah, exactly. And well, unfortunately, there's not a lot of science on that yet, and I'm hoping there's much more in the near future. We'll put it this real science. Unfortunately, it seems science nowadays is easily swayed by the checkbook, and it's unfortunate, really, because in some respects, like when it comes to genetic modification, I think it is.
Look, I can see where if you used it to improve crops, so you brought the rust-resistant gene into a drought-resistant wheat from another wheat plant, you'd just be speeding up the process of growing it in the greenhouses. But once you start putting salmon genes into tomatoes so they don't suffer from frost, it's of no use to anyone, really. And most of the work that's been done has been done so that they can spray glyphosate on it.
That's right. That's what I mean.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all.
No. So,
have you heard of Joel Salatin?
I have, yes.
Yeah. His phrase is, we're really good at hitting targets, we're just not real good at deciding whether or not we should hit the target. Or picking what the target is. Yeah.
Yes.
As a species. Yeah.
Yes. There's some strange thing goes on for intelligent species such as us.
Yeah. We might just stop there before we go down too many rabbit holes. But,
exactly, a good idea.
Yeah.
But probably just to finish off, if anybody wants to find out more about biodynamics, look up Australian Demeter Biodynamics on the web, and we have a website which is new, specifically for this new people looking, and it's biosoil.net.au, and it's got me on there and a number of other farmers, and you can learn the basics of what we do.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll put all those links in the show notes, and I'll include those there so that people can click through and find them. This probably won't be coming out till about the end of May, so we got time to get all that organised. All right, then. Is there anything else you need to get off your chest? Biodynamically?
No, I think what I haven't said tonight will be on the website so they can catch up there.
Well, I hope you all got something out of that. I know I did. Particularly interesting stuff. This has been a JM Podcasting Services production. Link in the show notes.